Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 Sting matches. We all know and love Sting, one of the biggest icons in wrestling over the last 30 years plus now, and this in my opinion are the 10 best matches of his career. I'm going to try as hard as I can to stay away from spoilers if you haven't seen any of these matches, so I am going to be a little bit vague about them, but I do recommend if you haven't seen these matches to go look them up. Most of them I believe are on Peacock, some are on New Japan World because, spoiler, there are going to be some from Japan, and some you'll have to go to TNA or Impact Wrestling service to watch them because their money was in that company. With all that being said, let's go right into the list. Our number 10, Sting vs. Big Van Vader from Super Brawl 3. There are a few people that when I think back on Sting's career that have more of an impact and a rivalry with Sting than Vader, and I always thought their matches were absolutely amazing. When these two would get together, there was a magic between the two. Vader in WCW, if you've never seen him there, was an absolute monster. I mean, he would be the equivalent of like what Brock Lesnar was or Goldberg was later in the decade. He was just unstoppable. What a fantastic match here. A great way to start off the top 10. Like I said, I love when these two match up with each other. And speaking of that, our number 9, Sting vs. Big Van Vader from Starrcade 92. Yes, I know, there's probably going to be a couple of these where we repeat opponents because there's a couple opponents he's had multiple great matches with. I would say every match on here is probably a 5-star match in my opinion or above that. Everything I just said with Vader on the previous match applies to this match as well. They had such a great chemistry, like I said, a really good white meat babyface and a dominant heel. This is another fantastic match in their series. Another great showing, hence why it's on my list. Now go from that, our number 8, Sting vs. Kurt Angle from Bound for Glory 2007. You knew there had to be at least one Kurt Angle match here. And he's literally one of the greatest wrestlers that's ever done it. And their rivalry and their matches in TNA at the time were some of the best things that TNA ever put on the air. You had just two icons, two phenomenal in-ring wrestlers. I thought this was a great match. That's why it's on here. Now going from that, our number 7, Sting vs. Ric Flair from Starrcade 1989. This is a maligned Starrcade, but to me, it's one of my favorites. It's the Iron Man one where there were two Iron Man tournaments, a tag team and a singles tournament, and I really liked it. Could be the fact that I liked everybody that was involved in both tournaments. It was a different concept at the time. It was almost like a one-night G1, and watching this before I ever had knowledge of what was happening in Japan, this really was novel to me. They didn't have tournaments like this in the United States. Just a phenomenal match, and within the time constraints, because I believe they only had a 20-minute time constraint in here, or may have been 15, they put on a fantastic showing. I mean, much like I said with Vader, Sting versus Ric Flair, probably the rivalry that most fans will remember Sting for. His biggest rival, his biggest opponent, one of their best matches in my opinion. Now going from that, Sting versus the Great Muta at Starrcade 91 in the Tokyo Dome, which if you're not familiar with that, this was a co-produced event between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WCW. I always kind of felt like Sting and the Great Muta were two sides of the same coin. Sting was the babyface of the coin, Muta was the heel of the coin. They were both young, ultra-athletic, ultra-charismatic wrestlers that wore face paint. They kind of were the templates of what the early 90s and even into the late 90s would be. Their influence for both of them is still felt to this day. I mean, even now, earlier this year when Great Muta had his last match, Sting was one of his partners. Much like I said with Vader, much like I said with Flair, Muta and Sting are tied together for the rest of history probably. They had a lot of great matches. This is my favorite of their matches, hence why it's on my list. Now go from that, our number 5. Arguably the best War Games match of all time, Sting's Squadron, Sting, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Dustin Rhodes, Barry Windham, and Nikita Koloff going up against the Dangerous Alliance, which was Rick Rude, Arn Anderson, Stunning Steve Austin, pre-Stone Cold, Beautiful Bobby Eaton, and Larry Zbyszko. And this was from Wrestle War 92. And if just hearing those names doesn't tell you about the talent that was involved, I mean, we literally have a who's who here. We have Ricky Steamboat, arguably one of the greatest in-ring talents. Barry Windham, same thing, one of the greatest in-ring talents of all time. Arn Anderson, right up there. Bobby Eaton, same for him. Rick Rude, Steve Austin. I would argue that Stunning Steve Austin in-ring was better than Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold had a better fleshed out, more interesting character, but in ring-wise, Stunning Steve to me was a bit better. Not saying that when he turned to Stone Cold he didn't have fantastic matches, because he absolutely did. There's a reason why he's one of the greats of all time. I mean, just some of the names here. Nikita Koloff, Larry Zbyszko, these are people that are legends in pro wrestling, people that have long, stellar careers. There's not a dud on this card. I mean, between the 10 people in this, there's not one of them I wouldn't consider a Hall of Famer. And I know some of them aren't WWE Hall of Famers, but I do believe they all are Observer Hall of Famers and Pro Wrestling Hall of Famers. So for me, like I said, I think they're all fantastic. One of my favorite War Games matches. It might be the best one in my opinion, and a lot of people will probably say the same thing. Now, next up, our number 4, Sting and the Great Muta going up against Rick and Scott Steiner from New Japan Pro Wrestling Super Show 2. Everything I said about Sting and Muta as opponents, you could double for them as a tag. They were so great together, and the Steiners, one of the great tag teams of all time. And yes, I know Rick is a little bit of a pariah right now, and again, I do not agree with what he said at all, putting it out there. I cannot argue though that the Steiner brothers aren't one of the 4 or 5 greatest tag teams of all time. This was a fantastic match with a little bit of a more high-paced, high-energy, faster style than we're used to. I mean, we had 4 of the best wrestlers, 4 of the great young wrestlers of the time. This would be like the equivalent of seeing like MJF teaming with Austin Theory to go up against Braun Breaker and Dominic Mysterio. I mean, you just had 4 immensely talented young wrestlers that were about to hit their prime, and they put on a fantastic match here. I absolutely love this match. I think it's one of the hidden gems in every man in here's career. A lot of people don't remember Sting and Muta teaming, which is awesome, just seeing that as a thing. This is fantastic, hence why it's number 4. Going from that, our number 3, Sting versus Ric Flair from Clash of the Champions 1, the very first Clash. This is the match that really put Sting on the map. I know I mentioned at the beginning of the video I wouldn't say any spoilers, but I think that everybody either has watched this match or knows about the outcome of this match. They went to a 1-hour draw. It was really like 49 minutes, but it was 1 hour for TV, and Flair absolutely made a star of Sting at this match. I mean, not to say that Sting wasn't already an up-and-coming star. The rub that he got from Ric Flair that night really made his career and really cemented him as the wrestler to be the wrestler for WCW for the next decade, which he absolutely was. Just a phenomenal match. A great way for a veteran to put over a younger guy to elevate them to their level without either one actually eating a loss. Great match. I absolutely loved it. Now going from that, our number 2, Sting versus Cactus Jack from Beach Blast 1992. And I realized looking at this, there's a lot of matches in 92. Sting had a banner year in that year. I mean, Mick Foley's even mentioned in his book that for a long time this was his favorite match. This to me, along with the Vader matches, really showed a different side of Sting, showed a more violent side of Sting, a side of Sting that was willing to take it to these extremes. I mean, the difference between wrestling a Vader or Cactus Jack and wrestling against a Ric Flair is night and day. And that's not saying that one is necessarily better than the other. You know, Flair is more known for being a technician, whereas Cactus and Vader are more known as brawlers, or in Cactus's eyes, a hardcore wrestler. I really love this match. This is one of the highlights of WCW in that time for me, hence why it's up so high on my list. And you had to know it was coming. Cactus Jack, Mick Foley is my favorite wrestler of all time, so you had to know this match was going to be on here. Now, before we do get to our number one, I do a thing here on my top 10s called the best of the rest, basically things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, Sting versus Jeff Jarrett from Bound for Glory 2006. So 2 years in a row at Bound for Glory, Sting had fantastic matches. Again, Jarrett's a guy that's kind of underrated, that people kind of looked at negatively because he was owner or in management at the time. But I really do think that other than AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, Jeff Jarrett is the face of that company, the face of TNA at the time. Even to this day, I can't watch Impact without thinking of Jeff Jarrett and all the goodwill he put out there. And yes, maybe sometimes he did push himself a little hard, but you can't argue with the fact that he's a great wrestler, and he probably deserved a spot. If he wouldn't have been the booker or owner, he probably would have got there anyway. Now, last but not least on the best of the rest, Sting and Lex Luger versus Steiner Brothers from the first Super Brawl. I love Luger, I love Sting. Again, the Steiners, I do appreciate them as a tag team. Yes, again, Rick is a pariah. I get it. I do think that the Sting and Luger tag team is one of those teams that's outweighed by their solo success, but it is one of the better tag teams in WCW history. I think these two work so well as teammates, as opponents, as friends. Another fantastic match with, again, 4 very young talents that are ready to take over the wrestling world. This was a great match, hence why it was considered. Now, before I get to my number one, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Shout out to Chris, I appreciate you joining, my friend. With all that being said, the number one Sting match, in my opinion, Sting versus Ric Flair from the Great American Bash 1990. Now, I really may be blinded by nostalgia for this, and I'll explain to you why. When I was a kid, I used to, have to ask my parents to get pay-per-views for me, or watch a pay-per-view with a friend that their parents got pay-per-views for them. This was the first pay-per-view I bought with my own money. And the reason I bought it was to see Sting versus Ric Flair. Again, much like I mentioned in their other matches that I brought up here, this is the quintessential WCW feud for me. And to me, the Clash of the Champions made Sting. This elevated Sting from just being a main event guy to potentially an all-timer with this match, in my opinion. I really love this match. I think it's the best match that Sting's ever done. It's one of the best matches that Ric Flair's ever had. I absolutely love this. I think it's a fantastic match. I know it gets overlooked by some of the other matches they've had with each other, so if you haven't seen this match, I implore you to look at this, go back and watch it, see if you agree with me. I think you will, because it is just that good. With that being said, this is my opinion of Sting's top 10 matches. If you made it here to the end, let me know what you think. What is your favorite? What do you think is the best Sting match of all time? Put it down here in the comments. And definitely smash that like, share. YouTube's algorithm has been a little bit weird as of late, and the more interactions I could get, maybe we could fix that algorithm. It doesn't seem to be working as it used to. So the more you guys comment, the more you share, the more you like this, the more it's going to help out. And I appreciate everyone that does. With that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.